On the last episode of the Keepsake box. Approximately an hour into my visit, Antonio entered the office and locked the door behind him. I stood as Antonio walked towards me, assuming that he wanted to claim his place behind his desk. Unbeknownst to me, he had other plans. Antonio placed his arms around my waist and kissed me as I stood. He and I had kissed a few times, so I wasn't expecting things to go any further. But when Antonio started to kiss my neck, I knew the experience would be different. To this day, the details are still very vivid in my mind. I tend to hold on to things in that way. I was wearing a denim dress with buttons down the entire front. Antonio released each button one by one as he kissed me. I wasn't wearing a bra that day, which worked out perfectly for the occasion. Antonio started at my neck and worked his way down. My heart began to race and I was noticeably shaking. Antonio smiled at me. "Just relax," he said. He instructed me to sit down in the chair. I did as he requested. Antonio got onto his knees and started kissing my breasts. He caressed my back while doing so. Antonio traced my nipples with his tongue, causing them to become erect. My body reacted to his touch in a way that I hadn't ever experienced prior to that point. After leaving my breast, Antonio worked his tongue down to my stomach. It was very sensual. I thought he would stop there, but he didn't. He continued to work his way down, exploring parts that hadn't ever been touched by a tongue. Antonio started by gently kissing the exterior while caressing the outsides of my legs. He licked in a gentle up and down motion. I tried to control the moaning, a task that was becoming increasingly difficult with every second that passed. Antonio pushed my legs up, causing my knees to come to rest on my breasts. While initially soft and sensual, Antonio began to eat with ravenous ferocity. He fully inserted his tongue and began a rapid sequence of in and out motions. All attempts to control the moaning had become futile at that point. I locked my legs around his head and grabbed the sides of the chair. And there it was, my first official orgasm. Antonio looked up at me as I reached my climax. He smiled and came up to kiss me. He got back onto his knees and started all over. And just like that, one orgasm became two. Antonio asked me to stand. I did as he requested. He kissed me as he buttoned my dress. Antonio didn't attempt to have sex with me, and I loved that. That was the night that most of my consideration for the other women went out of the window. I was there, and I wasn't going anywhere. Chapter 7, Clownfish and Anemone. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. Things moved quickly from that point. I became a regular at the club, sometimes for work, sometimes for play. I loved being there. Antonio paraded me around like I was a princess. I loved that too. As I started to spend more time around Antonio, I began to realize something. It was obvious that he viewed me differently than he viewed Cream and Peaches. He didn't seem to care what they did. He didn't care that they flirted with and entertained other men at the club. Antonio and I didn't have a formal relationship arrangement, but he made it obvious that I was off limits to anyone who frequented the club. Out of respect for him, no one even made the attempt. I began to understand that Antonio had a value system. He treated everyone and everything according to where they fell. I love feeling that Antonio valued me enough to hold me in a certain regard. He didn't want anyone else to have my attention, and he didn't want me to be tainted by the life that he lived. I remember the exact moment when that became apparent to me. One night I came to the club to spend time with Antonio. It was a social visit, so I wasn't camped out in the office. Antonio was in his office, and I was in the dressing room with the girls, not at all an unusual phenomenon. Cream addressed me in her usual diction. "Look tired, good." I translated her statement in my mind. "You look tired, little girl." I explained to Cream that I was exhausted. Between work at the gas station, school, the salon, and Antonio, I was certainly spreading myself too thin. Cream pondered for a moment before addressing me again. "How you look good?" That equaled, "How old are you, little girl?" I told her that I was 18. Cream responded with the question, "How bad do you want to be grown?" "How bad do you want to be grown?" I was confused by her question, but Cream and I had built a rapport based on the fact that we were both quite witty. I advised her that I hadn't come to the club to audition for adulthood. She laughed, and I laughed as well. Cream again addressed me. "Want something to keep you up?" "Want something to keep you up?" Before I could respond, Cream reached into her purse and retrieved a sandwich bag with white powder inside. Being aware of Cream's habits, I was pretty sure that the bag contained cocaine. She attempted to pass the bag over to me. "You know I don't do that," I said. Just as Cream was retracting her arm, Antonio walked into the dressing room. I watched his eyes zone in on Cream and enlarge. Antonio marched over to Cream and knocked the bag out of her hands. He then proceeded to throw her against the wall and put his hands around her throat. I watched the faces of the other women. Though everyone looked uncomfortable, no one spoke. You could have heard a pin drop. "What is wrong with you?" Antonio screamed. Cream looked terrified. I couldn't blame her. I was terrified, and I wasn't even the victim of his rage. Antonio threw Cream onto the floor. I watched her sob in between gasps for air. Antonio grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the dressing room. He dragged me all the way through the club to his office. Onlookers stared curiously as he pulled me inside of his office and slammed the door. I was immediately taken back to the night that Ken raped me in my bathroom. I was terrified and shaking like an abused animal. Antonio screamed loudly as he shook me by my arms. "Don't you ever let me catch you doing that stuff." His voice was loud and commanding. It seemed to reverberate through the walls. "I didn't do it," I screamed. "I didn't even have the intention to do it." Antonio released my arms. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Unexpectedly, I started to sob. I didn't even feel it coming on. "I'm so sorry," Antonio said. He hugged me so tightly that it was physically uncomfortable. Antonio released me from his embrace. Although they never fell, I could see that he had tears in his eyes. Antonio exercised an extreme amount of strength in fighting back the tears. He bypassed me and locked the door. The sound of the lock bolting terrified me, causing me to sob even harder. Antonio asked me to have a seat. I did as he requested. "Please stop crying," he said. I sat for a moment, attempting to regain my composure. After I had collected myself, Antonio addressed me. He did so in a way that only he could. Now, there's something that you have to understand. Antonio watched the Nature Channel more than anyone else that I knew. His viewing practices often became points of comparisons in his analogies. That day was the first of many times in which Antonio would use his extreme knowledge of animals to make a point to me. It wouldn't be the last, but it was certainly one that has stood out throughout the years. The conversation went a little something like this. "Baby, let's talk about something. What I'm about to tell you is serious, and you can't take it lightly. I know you've probably heard stories and speculation, but let me give it to you from the horse's mouth. You know that I've been dealing with these women for years, and it's obvious that I care about them to some degree. That being the case, you must be wondering why there's so much variation between the way I treat you and Sharon and the way I treat Cream and Peaches. And the answer is simple. It all boils down to respect. Cream and Peaches are like a troop of shrimp. They're scavengers that run in packs. Wild shrimp eat plant debris, worms, dead fish, clams, crabs, snails, and whatever other decaying matter they can find. Cream and Peaches are means to an end people. They do whatever it takes to satisfy whatever need they have at the time, whether it's money, drugs, attention, or anything else. Those types of people can't be trusted. Thus, they can't be respected. You're different, Londa. We're different together. You're like a clownfish, and I'm like a sea anemone. Clownfish are beautiful and delicate creatures. They're typically found residing in close proximity to sea anemones. Though typically predatory, the anemone develops a mutually beneficial relationship with the clownfish. Anemones are armed with stinging cells that release toxins when touched by prey or predators. The clownfish, however, develops a layer of mucus that makes it immune to the anemone's deadly toxins. That makes it possible for the clownfish to exist in a space that most other species could not. The anemone's toxins protect the clownfish as they would easily be prey otherwise. They also provide food for the clownfish. In return, the clownfish protects the anemone by chasing away certain species of predatory fish. You see, one hand washes the other. But here's the thing. Anemones anchor themselves to the seafloor. If the clownfish strays too far away, the anemone can't protect it. I'm trying to be a sea anemone for you. If you start moving as the shrimp do, I can't trust you. If I can't trust you, I can't respect you. And if you're too far away from me, I can't protect you. Cream and Peaches are predators. They will chew you up and spit you out before you've ever even realized that you were in their mouths. That's why I was so angry earlier. I don't want you to get swallowed up, little girl. You understand that, right? I understood where Antonio was coming from, and I appreciated his perspective. Additionally, I'm a bit of a sapiosexual. I was impressed by Antonio's ability to convey his position in such an intellectual manner. His extensive knowledge of animals was appealing to me, and his analogies always made perfect sense. I knew that Antonio saw me differently than he saw Cream and Peaches, and his explanation made me feel special. That probably would have been the end of the encounter, but Antonio decided to add a layer of complexity to his analogy. I stood and draped my arms around Antonio's neck. I gave him a peck on the lips and told him that I understood his point. You don't have to worry about that, I said. I have no desire to do drugs, and I certainly wouldn't at Cream's request. I appreciate you trying to protect me, though. That's cute. I turned, expecting to be on my way, but Antonio stopped me. Wait, he said. There's another thing. In addition to being beautiful and delicate, clownfish are fiercely loyal and monogamous. Can you do that for me? Only me? While I had initially been willing to accept Antonio's point of view, he had certainly thrown me for a loop. Sure, he had some valid points as they related to Cream and Peaches, but Antonio's request for one-sided monogamy was a different matter entirely. It created a desire to counter with an analogy of my own. I laughed a little before speaking. It became my intent to have Antonio remise. I addressed him. So, I was going to allow you to present your analogy unchallenged, but you seem to have excluded some important factors. Yes, the sea anemone protects and feeds the clownfish, but it isn't a deliberate action on its behalf. It is the simple nature of the sea anemone, and it's done with very little effort. The clownfish has to develop the mucus covering that makes it immune to the anemone. If it were ever washed away, the anemone would become predatory towards the clownfish as well. The anemone isn't just some generous creature. It also receives a benefit from providing the meals. The clownfish helps to preen the anemone by eating algae and other food leftovers. Without the deliberate action of the clownfish, the leftover debris would be of serious detriment to the anemone. Additionally, the anemone anchors itself to the seafloor. By default, it is never expected to make a move. It will remain comfortable in that space with everything it needs. And now, you want me to be a clownfish, loyal and monogamous. Meanwhile, you will be an anemone. You will collect clownfish at your leisure and kill them when the mucus washes away. By your logic, it doesn't seem that one hand washes the other at all. It seems that one hand extends itself and allows the other hand to pump the soap. By virtue of being what it is naturally designed to be, one hand exerts no effort in providing friction to the other hand. By default, the one hand receives the benefit of being clean by simply existing. Let's call a spade, Antonio. You provide and protect because that's what you do. By your own admission, Cream and Peaches are shrimp, yet you still do for them what you do for me. But we all serve a purpose for you as well. I surmise that I am still here because I'm good with numbers and I know how to move things around. While saying that you are shooting out the toxins to protect me, let's not forget that I am the one that's eating the algae. I am as beneficial to you as you are to me. If Cream and Peaches could cook the books, I wouldn't even exist. Antonio looked legitimately hurt and confused. I felt bad for saying the words after they left my mouth, but it was too late to take them back. Is that what you think? He asked. Before I could answer, Antonio picked me up and sat me on his desk. He positioned his body between my legs. Antonio kissed me slowly and deliberately. He looked into my eyes and addressed me. I've taken in everything you've said, and you're right. You are an asset to me, as are Peaches and Cream. But you are certainly wrong otherwise. You are around because I want you here. Ask yourself if I spend this amount of time with anyone else, even Sharon. That has to mean something to you, doesn't it? I know the situation isn't fair to you, but that's how we live. I'm not going to promise you anything that I'm not going to follow through with, including monogamy. It may seem selfish to ask you to dedicate yourself to me, but I can't imagine you being with anybody else. I'll do almost anything to prevent that from happening. I love you, little girl, and not in the way that I love Cream and Peaches. I am in love with you. I'm sorry that I failed to make that obvious to you, but now that I know how you feel, I'll make it right. I will do what it takes to make sure that you know where you stand with me. Will you open yourself up to the possibility of allowing me to do that? That was the first time that Antonio told me that he loved me. I shook my head, indicating that I would allow him to show me where I stood. Maybe Antonio didn't know it, but I only wanted to be with him. Entertaining someone else would have felt like as much of a betrayal to myself as it would have been to him. That's how much I cared about him. Antonio kissed me while caressing my back. I want you, he said. Let's go to your place. I snickered. I guess we've upgraded from office sex, I said. Antonio didn't laugh. We can't do this here, he said. The ride to my house was extremely sexually intense. It started with a simple kiss at the stoplight. After taking off, Antonio started to unbutton my jeans with his right hand. He reached into my pants and slid my underwear to the side. I closed my eyes and reclined my head. Antonio smiled as he inserted his fingers in and out, only stopping periodically to taste them. Just as I was about to reach my climax, he stopped. I opened my eyes to find that we were parked outside of my house. Antonio smiled. Let's go, he said. The moment we were inside, Antonio picked me up and took me into my bedroom. It was the most passionate sexual exchange that we had ever experienced. Antonio slowly stroked in and out. He whispered in my ear, only pausing to allow me to respond. He asked the questions, and I answered them. He asked, "You love me, little girl?" I said, "You know I do." He said, "Tell me." I said, "I love you, baby." He said, "Do you want me?" I said, "You know I do." He said, "Tell me." I said, "I want you more than anything." He said, "I want you to be mine. Will you be mine? Only mine?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Tell me again." I said, "I'm yours, all yours." He said, "That's my baby." And with that, we simultaneously experienced the most extreme orgasms. It was amazing. Antonio didn't have to worry about sharing me with anybody else. And he knew it. After we were done, Antonio stood and got dressed. He told me that he had to go back to the club to get cream and peaches. "You riding?" he asked. I told him that I was exhausted and needed to go to sleep. Antonio told me that he would be back after dropping them off. I reached into my nightstand and gave him an extra key. "Let yourself in," I said. Antonio kissed me and left to complete his task. Shortly thereafter, Antonio returned. He slid into bed behind me and held me close. He whispered in my ear, "I love you, little girl." I reciprocated his statement. I fell asleep in his arms, feeling loved and protected by my anemone. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.